There are 5 fundraising blunders that almost guarantee your $1 million funding round will fall apart. And most founders have no idea they're even making them. And what's even worse is that these are all avoidable once you know what to look out for. After years of helping founders raise over $250 million in startup capital, I've seen these same 5 mistakes cause founders massive delays and inevitable failures in their funding round. So in this video, I'm going to show you what those 5 are, how to avoid them, and what to do to make sure that never happens again so that you don't get that dreaded no. And the first mistake is super important because without it, you just become forgettable, and is a key reason for why investors are giving you crap projections all the time, like you're too early or we need more traction, all of these things that you know don't really matter. So what is it? Mistake number 1, and I think the best way to explain this mistake is actually by using Uber, and also a company that my old fund invested into. So when I was a VC, we invested into a company called Cabby with a K, and we did a big funding round for them. And what they were doing were they were basically, as the big thing back in the day was, democratizing taxi companies. Okay, so they were basically bringing taxi companies into a marketplace on an app that you could use to help you find a taxi for yourself in London. So they were just getting every taxi company online, basically. Now, they were doing quite good. Then a scrappy company called Uber came to London and absolutely decimated this company we invested into. And as you know, Uber did that across the world and created a new category. And there was a big reason for why that happened. And the big reason was they actually had some unique insights about their market. The biggest one for them was, and we saw it and we saw it actually happen, was everyone else was trying to just put taxi companies online like Cabby. Uber realized that that's not the way and people care about. They don't just care about taxi companies being online, they care about the service they're getting. And Uber, their unique insight was that they were going to own the whole process. They were going to own the cars. They were going to own everything so that they had a seamless app. You could, go on the app, you'd be able to put everything in, payments would be done, you'd be able to go off, everything would just work, and you could leave, and it would also come in such a small amount of time because you didn't have to deal with quality control. You didn't have to deal with external taxi companies or anything like that. Everything would be seamless and cheaper and much easier to use. And that's the biggest reason why Uber was so successful. Now, when it comes to funding and fundraising, founders never show their unique insights. You never show what truly makes you unique and why you'll be as successful as Uber is. So when you go into these meetings with investors, all they are hearing is just the same generic conversations and insights that they've heard from every single one of your competitors or other people in your industry. And they're not really getting any reason for why you're going to be something different, why you're going to be the one of one that's actually going to change this industry. So how do you change this? How do you make yourself more unique? And the best way that I've found to do this is you need to ask yourself 2 different questions. The first one is, what are you actually doing that is truly unique that's going to make you different from every single other person? And I want you to focus on impact. So it's not just saying, hey, we software as a medical device, which is one of the my old clients had before he raised. That's not a unique insight, okay? That's just, software should happen in medical, cool. That's not anything. What you should be saying is something along the lines of, everyone else is focusing on how you improve the data by doing this. However, what we're doing is we're focusing and targeting on this point here. And by doing that, we are 3 times faster, 10 times cheaper, easier to use and implement, whatever it is. And you should have 3 unique insights of what you're truly doing differently, what's going to make you truly different and unique about whether it's your product, whether it's about how your go-to-market goes, whether it's how you're building your business. I remember, a great example was one of Harry Stebbings of 20VC. He invested into a company. One of the core things he said was because the founder had amazing insights around how he was going to build his business. So it doesn't have to be about the product or the market necessarily. It can be, I believe in exactly this, and no one else is doing it in this way. And if we are successful in this way, this is how we're going to win. So you need to find out what your unique insights are there. The second one is what is your industry currently doing, whether it's your direct competitors, your other tech competitors, or incumbents. Why do they not have the same level of insights as you? Why will they never have the same level of insights as you? And how does the impact happen because of that as well? And once you have both of these, you can start to build 6-ish insights about what makes you great and what the incumbents or whatever's happening of why they can't ever create the same thing as you, and create that gap of why you're so different and why you're one of one. And once you create that unique insight, that's what's going to make you unforgettable. That's what's going to make investors feel like you are going to change this industry and you're going to be able to build a big enough business that they're going to get excited by. You're going to have the unique insights. They're going to feel that, and they're going to feel like you are someone they want to back. Now, the second mistake is very important, because it doesn't matter how great your unique insights are. If you don't do this properly, you'll never actually be able to explain it well enough in a meeting. So let's go on to mistake number 2. And mistake number 2 is very similar to what happened with my client Daniel before he was with me. So Daniel was building a startup. He had tried to fundraise twice and it just wasn't working. He was failing them. He had to just get just some random money coming through as much as possible, trying to get everything, and it just wasn't working. He didn't really build out a successful funding round in any way. And the biggest problem was that, and once we really started to work onto it, was what is actually happening in those investor calls. And one of the first things I asked to him is, are you practicing and are you recording your calls? And Daniel wasn't. And what happened was, because he wasn't practicing, because he was taking these investor calls as they came, he never really understood what was going right or wrong in his funding round. And I see this with founders all the time. You're not practicing and you're not looking at what works and what doesn't. So you have no clue about what's eroding trust, and you're not ever improving yourself when it comes to investor meetings. So all you're doing is you're making the same mistakes over and over again and burning as many bridges as possible. And that's the one thing we want to get away from. We don't want to do that. We don't want to just keep butting our heads against the wall and hoping for the best. That's just never how it works. Like, no sportsman ever in the world has ever done that. They've always prepared in the right manner. And by doing that with Daniel, we set up a proper practice sessions, mock calls with me, but then also practice calls. We recorded his calls and we went through everything. He started to hone into what was working or not. How did he need to improve certain things? What was the wording that we need to improve? And from that, he raised 4.5 million euros for his funding round, in a very successful funding round, from previously not being able to raise before. And that's really what I want you to be doing, practicing as much as possible. So how do you do this? Well, there's a couple of things I want you to do. The first thing is I want you to have practice calls, so you can simulate pitches with people, but also have dry runs. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to record them. You have to record your calls, preferably by using something like Fathom, which is, an AI note taker or any of them. You can use something like Granola, which steps on the back end so no one can see it, and that'll give you a transcribe. You need to make sure that you're recording yourself so you can look back and you can see what's working or not. And then as you do that, go through every single recording. Look back at them. See how long it took for you to answer questions. What were the major questions being answered? Were you improving this answer or not from the last time? Make sure you're doing this, because then as soon as that happens, you'll start to tinker. You'll start to work on what's working or not and actually improve and practice. And at that point, you'll be much better off, because you'll know the kind of questions that are being asked. You'll be much more prepared with the answers and what you're doing, and you'll know where you're going right or wrong. But this is where the third mistake comes in, because if you keep making this mistake, you're never really going to be able to understand what to practice properly, but also what to do in your funding round. So for mistake number 3, imagine someone saying they're trying to sell their house. They list it once. They just let random people wander in at different times. Maybe they answer questions differently depending on who shows up. They never mention other buyers. They never set deadlines. They just hope that eventually someone falls in love and makes an offer on their house. Like, what do you think happens when that happens? Usually months are going to go by. There's going to be plenty of viewings, but there's no offers. No one's really pushing forward with wanting to actually buy the house. And it's really up to pot luck. And a big reason for that is that they don't understand the psychology behind the buyer and how they can make a proper process. You can probably see that and feel that if you were trying to buy a house or even sell a house. Now, compare that to the kind of houses that get sold super fast for super high prices. There's always a process. right? There's probably a launch date of when it's going to happen, and there's proper preparation. In the US, it's not always, but maybe there's an open house where people can start to look at them and actually see and be excited. The viewings are compressed into a short window, and everyone knows that this house is probably going to get bought very soon, which creates signals of demand. And there's clear next steps for everyone if they feel like they're going to lose it if they don't. And those deadlines are what creates and forces decisions that makes those houses sell for much higher prices and a much faster way. Nothing about that house has changed within these two, but only the process and the psychology did. And fundraising works exactly in the same way, but you just need to understand that psychology to then create the right process. And that's where founders go wrong all the time. And look, I totally get it. I failed 2 fundraisers before my third one. I was able to be successful because I didn't understand this psychology. And even then, I only really understood it after sitting on the VC side. But you need to understand the psychology behind why investors make decisions, what pushes them, what pulls them, and then create a process to build it out. But how do you do this in the right way? Well, when it comes to the launch of your fundraise, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to actually find out the day that you want to officially fundraise. So you shouldn't just be fundraising randomly and just taking meetings as they come. You want to stop all investor calls, you want to stop all of that, and you want to say to yourself, okay, when do I want to have my first investor calls? Is it in a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now? Is it in 6 months from now? Find the day you're going to have of those first meetings. Then what I want you to do is I want you to work backwards. So how long is it going to take for me to actually get the introductions and get those meetings? What is it going to take for me to make sure that all of the meetings are at the same time, which is building warm introductions, doing everything correctly in that way? Am I going to have some cold emails in there? It should be a small amount, 10%, but there's going to be some in there. Then what we have to do is we keep working backwards. Okay, we've understood the first month is getting the intros, activating them in the right way, conducting ourselves correctly. Perfect. But what do we do for the month before that, and the month before that, and the month before that? You need to create a month-by-month timeline and a week-by-week timeline, to be honest with you, so that you know this is the process that I'm doing. And then when it comes to the actual process, once you're in the process and you put everyone in a condensed window, then it's about making sure that you have a Monday management meeting where you're actually sitting down and chatting and saying what's happened this week, what do we do to the next steps? And before you're doing anything with any investor and talking to any of them, thinking about the psychology. What am I saying here via my emails or via comments I'm going to make in the next meeting that's going to make them feel like there are deadlines, there is pressure, there is FOMO, or am I not doing that? And with that preparation, with that psychology there and with that practice, that's the way in which you can really build out a proper process that gets term sheets. But you can't build a proper launch timeline without the mistake number 4. And this is a big mistake, and it's probably the most common mistake the founders make. So mistake number 4, and that's trying to rely too much on cold emails instead of warm intros. And look, I totally get why you do it. Cold emails are easy. It's direct. You can say, I can send 1,000 emails and something will happen. But I'll use Charlie as an example. Before Charlie came to me, he was trying to blast cold emails and it just wasn't working. His fundraise was not working. It was stalling. And the big reason for that is because he was trying to spam investors via cold and nothing was happening. It's a bit like trying to go on a date with another person. If you just try and spam them via mail or via text message because you found their random number, are they going to like you? No, they're not. However, if they're introduced to you by a friend and the friend says, hey, you've got to meet this person, they're amazing, there's inherent trust built in there and that person's much more likely to want to date you. And it's exactly the same with fundraising. Fundraising is very similar to dating. So coming back to Charlie, he was blasting cold emails. He was getting nowhere with investors. But what we did is we built out his network. We organized it. We understood where his connections were. We mapped out everything. And we, at that point, then understood the psychology of the launch. And we connected with the right people. And at that point, he had 50 plus investor meetings and raised $5 million from it. But how do you do this yourself, especially when you don't have a network? There's an extra video I'll put in the link below where you can have a much more detailed breakdown of how to build a network. But the biggest thing I want to say is you need to first get organized. You have to assemble, I think of it in the AIR framework, which is assemble, which is let's actually get yourself organized in your network and build it out in the right manner so that we understand how many funds we have. We're starting to assemble our connector list and getting ourselves organized on these are all the people who can help me. and then actually just starting to connect with them. And that's where the intros come. We need to have a system in place of how we can potentially get warm intros in the future. The big one is actually connecting, giving them as much value as possible, not asking for anything at the beginning and not being transactional, and just trying to build the network slowly over a longer period of time. And then it's about running it on the AIR framework, which is how do we then use that to then get introductions. And the big thing I'd say here is we need to confirm who's going to introduce to who before we actually activate them. So when you've got all this connector list, you've built all this, you've helped them as much as possible, you should be sending them a list. This is the list of funds that we want to speak to. We're going to be doing our fundraise at this certain date. Can you please let me know who you can introduce me to? Because at that point, we can create the flywheel and we can then assemble, we can go back to assemble, right? We can say, okay, these are all the people that we're going to get connections into, which funds, which ones are we missing? Why is that? Can we improve that? Do we have to go to our network again? Do we have to speak to more people? Do we have to have some of them of cold? That's just going to happen. But mainly making focus that we have 90% plus in warm intros. And then the last mistake kind of underpins everything of all of the other 4 mistakes, and is a big reason for why founders fail. So number 5, and the best way of explaining number 5 is actually an athlete or a sports person. So when you think of an athlete, what do you think makes them successful? What most people think is they're just naturally talented. But if you actually know athletes and you know what happens, an extreme amount of preparation goes into what they're doing. Let's take footballer, for example. Yes, they play a game of football every week or every weekend. But the preparation that they do for that rest of the week, whether it's how they're eating, the training that they're doing and practice, what they're doing in their downtime, what they're thinking about in the future, what they've done over the last 10 years, all of these is what allows them to succeed on the weekend for the 90 minutes that they do. And it's exactly the same when it comes to preparing your fundraise. You have to treat yourself as an athlete. This is an extremely hard, fundraising is extremely hard. It's high ticket sales. You're asking people to potentially invest millions of dollars into you. And if you're not preparing yourself like an athlete, what's the point? You're never going to be able to successfully fundraise. So you need to think of yourself like a sports person. You need to be preparing early enough. Where founders go wrong is they treat fundraising like this dirty thing that they have to do every 2 years, when it should be, I know I'm fundraising in 6 months from now. What am I doing at this point in time that's going to give me the highest chance of success in 6 months? What do I have to do right now? How do I keep myself on top of that? Because the worst thing you can do is you can go into a fundraise unprepared, because that's where you're going to start resorting to cold emails. It's where you're not going to be practicing. You're going to burn all the bridges you've built with the connectors or in the investor meetings. That's where you're going to have a 6 to 12 month delayed fundraise that's not working because you didn't prepare your fundraise. You didn't do the necessary things to build your network, to create a great narrative, to do the right processes, to understand investor psychology. But find the day that you want to fundraise and look back and see where you're preparing and give yourself enough time to prepare. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how I can help you with that, then check the link down below and I'll show you exactly how we can prepare that together. These are the 5 main mistakes that stop you from raising your round and things that you really need to make sure that you get past if you want to successfully fundraise. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to actually practice investor questions as you go through them, then check out this next video where I go through exactly that.